Talking loud in the nighttime air. Voices clash, waiting out of care. Opinions flare like they matter so. But who's right, we'll never know. Microphones like weapons drawn. Swagger in the twilight dawn. Each word iron, each thought steel. To be heard is the final deal. Howling offense in the midnight haze. Everybody's offended, each one sways. We're offended, you're offended, that's the way. Claim the night with the things we say. Truths clash like broken dreams. Voice to voice, let it scream. What's real in this foggy light? Bow hard till the morning light. Feel the hunger of the crowd. Anxious to erupt so loud. Unity in discord side. Witness as their worlds collide. Howling offense in the midnight haze. Everybody's offended, each one's rage. We're offended, you're offended, that's the way. Claim the night with the things we say. Truths clash like broken dreams. Raise your voice, let it scream. What's real in this foggy light? Battle hard till the morning light. Feel the hunger of the crowd. Anxious to erupt so loud. Unity in discord's tide. Witness as their worlds collide. Howling offense in the midnight haze. Everybody's offended, each one's ways. We're offended, you're offended, that's the way. Claim the night with the things we say. We say. We say. We say. Voice we say. Voice we say.
Yes, my mother twitted my fucking temples.
How can we dash when our earth is turning?
They don't produce anything. They don't do anything.
How do we sleep when the beds are burning? How can we dance when our earth is turning?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to We're Offended, You're Offended. I'm Kim. This is Tyler, and this is our very special guest. Why don't you introduce
Bennett.
yourself?
Hi,
The
well,
man.
yeah, Bennett Hunter. I also go by the Canadian Libertarian, but let me just say first and foremost, thanks for that intro because that just reminds me. My son's big into the music too, but just how many talented people there are in this country. It's a beautiful thing. That was actually awesome, and I love to see these kinds of things. And the fact that you got your son involved in this too, that's just awesome. My son was actually the one that got me into kind of doing the live streams because I used to do a lot of things, but I'm not much into texting. I can't stand texting. So I wanted to do everything. I wanted to do everything in video and audio form, but I'm not a big fan of cameras either. My whole life, I kind of like try to avoid them like the plague. But my son kind of reminded me that, hey, Dad, anytime I was shy to do anything, what did you tell me to do? Kind of get over it and try to, put your best foot forward, figure it out. So I had to take his advice because I was dishing it out. So sure enough, and it was pretty uncomfortable early on. But yeah, I've kind of gotten a little bit used to it over the years. I guess I've been going at this for about 14 and a half years now. So it's kind of not really new to me now. But yeah, I guess if you just want to know, I'm just a Canadian on the East Coast. I actually am one of those people, believe it or not, when people say, well, who will build the roads? Well, me and the company I work for one. Yeah, there's no need or concern about if you shrink the size and scope of government that your roads aren't going to get fixed or you're somehow grandma's just going to die on the side of the curb or anything like that. What I've come to realize over the years is actually a lot of the things that people think that you need government for, actually you don't. And actually in the modern world that we live in, this is actually coming to fruition. And Elon Musk is just one person that's got multiple companies that actually proves my point. And the fact that you don't need government. You know, think about it just 10, 15 years ago, if you had said to someone, how the hell would you get into space? Well, you need government, right? That's the only way you could ever get into space.
Yeah,
Well, you
that's
need
right,
government. Right? No, you don't need that. Or what about for telecommunication? Well, hey, I got Starlink. Actually, that's what I live in rural New Brunswick, where if I didn't have my Starlink, I tell you, it'd be about what I think when I had my ExploreNet, I think you could get up to 5 megabytes for download.
Calm down. That's
Yeah, I
a
know.
little that's crazy.
Right. But like I say, and this has been a game changer, and it doesn't rely on like the ground-based infrastructure and type of thing. And then there's just so many other areas. I won't go on. I won't banter about that. But like I say, every time people comes up with an idea or an excuse why you need government, well, once again, innovators, entrepreneurs, and great minds are coming up with ways time and time again to say, no, we don't need government. Because at the end of the day, really, let's be honest here, folks, government is force, right? So when you're saying we need government, you're saying we need to use force. Well, I just like in the macro settings in terms of citizens and the government, well, just like in your family. Yes, there are some parents, and I grew up in them, especially when I grew up in the 70s, where yes, they too thought that you had to use violence as your means to an end, while they were hypocritical telling you as kids, don't use violence, right? Don't hit, don't steal, while they were hitting and stealing. So like I say, it's hypocritical in nature, but we are evolving past these things. Some people are at different levels in terms of their understanding, and it is fear driven why people get pushed back into the government. But I tell you, at some point in time, we humans, might not be us in particular as individuals, but there will be people looking back at these days, just like when we look back on the days of slavery, actual human ownership, and say, I can't believe people thought that was actually legit, or that was a way to go through life. And just like with the parents that raised their kids, by using force as a means to their end, a lot of them found out that as soon as their kids were old enough, well, they left home and never wanted nothing to do with them again. So it kind of turned out to not be the most beneficial way to do that. Anyways, that's kind of my rant. That's kind of my history. That's kind of my thing is, I'm all about peaceful and voluntary and cooperative initiatives rather than using force and violence and theft as a means to an end. The shocking thing, how terrible of me. I'm so extreme.
I know.
See, I'm team low road. I'm okay with having to use force. Like unfortunately, we live in a world where we have to. Like there's some things with like the libertarian ideas that I agree with more before, but I agree with less now. I think
okay, but before you continue on, can I just say this though? Because the one thing that some libertarians don't clarify, because you do have people of all different backgrounds and stripes that claim to be libertarians. So a pacifist would be someone I would be against. But the point of libertarianism is it doesn't prevent violence as a means of self-defense. So violence is completely and wholly acceptable. As a libertarian, and as even growing up in the School of Hard Knocks in the East End of Toronto, let me tell you, I never went looking for a fight, but if it came to me, I never shied away. So I'm not against violence. And actually, the proper libertarian thing, and even if you think about it in terms of Christian ethics, is you don't. Well, I mean, I guess the one difference between us and the Christian thing is I don't really look to turn the cheek, right? It's like, if you come at me, you're going to get back. So the libertarian ideal is this, just not to use violence as your means to an end. But if someone else is using violence as a means to their end, of course you should have every right, and you should actually do whatever you can to defend yourself or those you love or anyone else too. So I just wanted to clarify that before you.
I could definitely get into it because I've kind of become more disillusioned with kind of the libertarian, like the non-aggression kind of principles, especially with what we've seen today. But we can get into that later. I wanted to get into the title of the show. Right. Mark Carney, that is sworn in as the
new PM.
Prime Minister of Canada. Yes, he is the savior of Canada. So I just wanted to go over this quick. So this was actually from CJLS. Dude, every sentence isn't a paragraph, I promise you guys. But you know what? They give a pretty good synopsis. So Canada's new prime minister has canceled his predecessor's consumer carbon tax. Very, very particular words. Mark Carney signed an order in council on Friday, just hours after being sworn in. The consumer carbon tax is not working, Carney said. It's become too divisive at a time when Canada needs to be united. As my government's first order of business, I have canceled it. Canadians who've received the carbon tax rebates will still get one in April, said the Prime Minister. Eliminating the consumer carbon tax is a promise, Mark Carney said during his Liberal leadership race. It reduces 17 cents on gasoline, 21 cents on diesel. So, with this being said, this is not a corporate on the corporate side. So when everyone is talking about carbon tax or this levy on energy, okay, industry, this is what's, I think people are going to see this and say, oh, cost of goods are going to go down. No, that's not how it's going to happen, because industry companies that I work for still are charged carbon tax. There's still a fuel surcharge that gets tacked on to any transportation or anything with regards to dealing with the movement of goods. So I think this is good on the consumer side. The crazy thing is, I'll pull this up, but it is crazy how, where the hell did I put it? Here it is. How do I work this gizmo? No, not me. There we go. This is as of March 14th, as of yesterday. Liberal Party, if there was an election today, they have overtaken the Conservatives.
All literally because one guy came in and said, guess what, guys? No more carbon tax. And people don't even read the fine print.
But this shows that people are looking for, whether it is consumer goods. And this, I said, I've become more and more disillusioned with where the Conservative Party has moved. They left their base. They no longer listen to their base. And a lot of people are saying, you know what? I'm done. I've said time and time again that, Pierre, dude, you got to take a stance on something. Stop making it about Trudeau. Like, yes, you can tie it to Trudeau. This is what Trudeau did to you. This is what we're going to do. This is the moves we're going to make. Instead of always just attacking the person, yes, tie it to the person. But, well, what did they do? They got rid of Trudeau. Well, we need a carbon tax election. Well, it seems like they just had one. Now what? Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, if you don't mind, if I could just chime in on that, because actually I had actually brought this up and was sharing this stuff earlier. So this is from a City News Everywhere article anyways, but just down here, I'll just read a little caption here. So the government is able to end the consumer carbon tax without repealing or amending the law. The Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, which was passed in 2019, sets out a framework for both the consumer carbon price and the industrial price. The law allows the fuel price to be set by regulation, which means Cabinet can set the price through an order in council as it did Friday. So what that tells you first and foremost is obviously it could have been taken off. Like, you didn't have to do anything other than basically a stroke of the pen. And it was there. And it was something that even when they were bantering about and talking about this stuff and how much Canadians were suffering, how easy that could have been done. And the fact that Mark Carney was the Trudeau advisor, so obviously he wasn't advising them very well if he didn't say, oh, by the way, you can just do this, right? And the fact that the carbon price, let me just say this in terms of the carbon price, and you folks would know this as well. As someone, I started working at 15, consider the carbon price, even right now, when it's removed on April 1st, even if you do see a temporary reprieve, it's not a whole lot more different than as if, to give you some kind of analogy, is minimum wage. So when I started working in 1985, minimum wage is $4.25 an hour. Fast forward to now, I think in New Brunswick, what's it like, around 15, 16 bucks, somewhere around there. So, I mean, it's increased by what, fourfold, but you see the price of everything around you has increased that and a little bit, actually, to the point, if you actually average things out, our purchasing power over the last 4 decades, it's actually not just stagnated, but we've lost. So if you were from 1985, I remember even in the 80s or the early 90s, you could rent in Ontario, in Toronto, in the East End, you could rent a 3-bedroom apartment for like $300 and some dollars. Right? Yeah, try that now. So you'll get a temporary reprieve, by this. at least at the gas pumps, when it comes off April 1st, this will be the little trick, that sleight of hand that you're saying, where it'll entice Canadians. Oh, look, I'm getting, but it won't be long. And that's actually one of the posts that I put out there, is to tell people, because they've shifted this stuff around so much. If you're not being very perceptive how they do it, pay attention to the gas prices today, pay attention to the gas prices after April 1st, and then watch how that correlation changes in pretty short order till you're back to the proverbial dog chasing his tail once again. So like you were saying, you were absolutely correct all along, it's just a sleight of hand, and it's not actually going to prove out to be much of a boon or a benefit for Canadians.
Well, and we've seen the Liberal Party has made talks or have said that, like, yeah, it's going up, there's nothing that we can do. It was that conditioning. So yes, an order of council, he can just say, because everyone's focusing as though he's repealed this. He hasn't repealed anything. He just said, set it to 0.
Yeah.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
The law's not gone. Nothing's really changed. The laws are still there. He can say, all right, April 1st, crank it up to 55 cents.
Yep. Exactly. Well, here in New Brunswick, I'm not sure what in your province, but here in New Brunswick, we have that, and it's every Friday, I think it is, or whatever, when the regulator. So yeah, the regulator here in Canada or in New Brunswick could do the exact same thing, but it wouldn't change anything other than the fact that this week they gave us a little break, but then next week could be a complete difference. So like you're saying, there's nothing that's enshrined in law that says it's not going to happen. This is just their way. And this is that sneaky, underhanded way for the Liberals. And Carney's definitely one of those greasy Liberal types. And I don't even like use the term Liberals, because I don't think they're liberal by any stretch, right? Liberal in their use of collectivism or authoritarianism, maybe. But this is
capital
just
L.
Yeah, this is just their way.
Liberal.
This is just what they're saying. They're doing is this is a big sales tactic and a big lure for Canadians, and it's working good, just like with COVID. Isn't that disappointing to know that even after COVID, Canadians are going to fall for this shit again? Like, holy fuck, fool me once, right? But like, how do you get to the point where after you had the biggest social experiment in human history and you fell for it, and you know now that you did, because even the people who were deniers earlier on, you know damn well you got duped into it, and whether you want to admit it now or not is beside the point. But are you really going to be susceptible to being fooled this quick, this early on? Like, you know, the vaccines are actually still being issued.
I know, and
right?
And there's a lot. I think a lot of people, like the most people, they're just trying to get through their day. You know, they got hockey, they got soccer. You know, they see the cost of goods are going up. Oh, I got to work more. My taxes have gone up. I got to work. Like everyone, they're so inundated with the day-to-day monotony of being alive.
Right.
And then, you know, like Bill Burr had said, you know, during COVID, man, I don't know. I turn the TV on, mask, no mask, and I carry on with my day. I don't think I just, all right, I guess that's what we're doing today. Yes, there's some people who definitely look at things, people who are more informed, who try to give a perspective or anything like that. And they just go like, I don't know, the man in the box, the woman in the box, Caesar in the box told me what to think. So, you know, they're authoritative from a time where, you know, we used to look, everyone watched, like, and this is an interesting, like, okay, so we used to watch like Walter Cronkite, or, you know, we'd always, it was everyone was kind of sequestered into, this is the message.
Yeah.
And then we can, you know, you could interpret it a different way. You know, this guy's a crook. Like maybe you heard someone say, you know, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, well, did you know he did this? But it was kind of in hushed circles. It didn't make, it couldn't reach a global audience. And that's what the internet has allowed. Like, there are people, you and I, anyone has never heard of, and they have 100 million followers on YouTube. They have these massive audiences, and you're going, I have no idea who this person is. They're completely devoid from my world. If they died today and a big eulogy was held, that I don't know who this is. So we've kind of siloed ourselves into these little groups. There's people that I watch that people have no idea, and they have millions of followers. They have no idea. And so we've kind of self-siloed with views that we agree, or maybe even people we believe are trustworthy. You know, like I watch people like Jimmy Dore, Steven Crowder, or like Tim Pool, or I've been watching like a lot of like Andrew Wilson, like those. That is that you want to see a gambit of people outside of hardcore leftists. Like that's it.
Yeah.
Moderate Christian conservative, hardcore Christian conservative, liberal or classical liberal, and then like Jimmy Dore's like a socialist. Like that's a pretty wide scope of people to get information from, and then kind of, okay, well, this makes sense. What they're saying doesn't make you get a smattering of information, as opposed to, you know, that Brian Tyler whatever, tell no lie or no lie with whatever the fuck his name is, and people just go, oh, he's telling me the truth because his show's called No Lie, so he must be telling me the truth. So, and
maybe
so
that's where we went wrong. Maybe we should have said that too.
know, right? We're truthful, you're truthful. I don't know. but we very much see that this is where these types of, like, we can't talk to each other because we, you know, with Mark Carney, though, people are going to say, look, he abolished carbon tax. Why haven't the prices fallen? Well, he didn't. He just set it to 0, but it's on the industry side, so your cost of goods don't go down. No, that's a lie. That's bullshit. You're lying to me. And so we can't even talk because we're, you know, as the expression goes, it's one screen, 2 films. We're seeing very, very different things.
Yeah, well, let me just reply to that, actually, because that's actually one thing that us libertarians get accused of is, yeah, it's your guys' fault because you're just all about the individual. And what it is when you hear about when you talk about whether ideologies or ethics or principles, it's the people who are carrying the message, right? So that's the thing where it's most important. So, you know, if you were listening to a libertarian because that's the other thing, libertarian, I mean, to me, it's the self-ownership, property rights, and the non-aggression principle. Those are the 3 core tenets of it. But those things can be applicable. So if you're a degenerate or a hedonist, right, and you want everything that's not using force to be legal, right, because libertarianism and individual liberty does allow for, you know, if you want to be a druggie, right? But once again, this is the area where, as a libertarian, like, the underlying ethics do matter, because I don't want to impose my will on people, but you have to have a perspective and opinion, right? So my perspective is opinion. Yes, I shouldn't, you know, be locking you in a cage if you have a severe drug issue. You know, there might be things that might be more suitable to help you, right? But at the same time, I should be saying that I don't want to lock you in a cage for it, but you need help, and I'm not going to accept or condone your habits or your behavior. I want to raise and elevate people. I don't want to clobber them over the head, but I do want to raise and elevate. And that's the thing with the individualizing and putting ourselves in the silo. As we do this, it works, but it's just reinforcing our own message. But what, just like with me, and I'm sure with you folks, what sharpens a stone, right, is another hard edge, or what sharpens a knife is another hard edge. So because we're not going through as much of this, the trauma of actually engaging, and that happened during COVID, of actually dealing with each other and having those difficult arguments and conversations, is everyone's just kind of siloing themselves, and they're just being reinforced by people who are telling them the same thing over again and saying, no, you're right, your way is the right way, the way you're thinking is just fine. And that's why people like us, that's why I'm glad, I don't care what I've never asked you guys nor anyone, I don't care what your political leanings is, or are you a decent person and you're willing to leave me the hell alone to live my life? Or do you care enough to maybe try to help me in the situation and through voluntary means? These are the things that matter to me. And the fact that we're all coming together today, and I see more and more people, is I think we're all seeing the writing on the wall. For a while, we could kind of sit back and do our thing. And I think a lot of it is just us all figuring this stuff out for ourselves. But I think we're all seeing now that, you know, we're getting that much closer to the precipice, to the edge. And I think we're starting to realize is, yes, the time for just banter and sitting down functioning in echo chambers is not going to work. What we have to do is just, I would imagine that's how the American people, and it's kind of weird that it took a guy like Trump to do it, but you can bet, and a lot of Canadians talk about how Americans, oh, look at how they're always Canadians look down through their nose at the Americans fighting and bickering, but actually that's a great thing. I want to see, matter of fact, in a situation, you want to see people arguing to try to figure things out, because the only other two options, like Jordan Peterson said, right, is what, to walk away or to use violence. So actually the only thing that we have at the tool in our belt that is conducive for actually helping us bring about real change, and it doesn't involve violence or force, is for us engaging and having those difficult discussions, which is what we should do. And everyone that I've ever talked to, even people like, I've talked to people who are modern monetary theorists, socialists, I've talked to people on the left many times in the past, but when you talk to them in person and you make that a personal thing where you look at people, that's how we humans function. You can actually tamp down a lot of those grievances and a lot of those things that they think that they should hate you for, just by having these conversations. And I think if we do this at the macro level, like what we're doing, and leading by example, it will help us get to a point where maybe we will get sick and tired of all this arguing and say, okay, let's figure it out, whether it's a minarchist state, whatever it is, but let's just figure out where we don't have this thing that's constantly making it so that we have to feel like if our opponents gets the control of the government, they're going to use it against me. Well, if we make government so minute, so limited in scope, and we don't have to worry about that, then we, all of us, the left, the right, and everyone can have that more, live, let live mentality without having to constantly peering over their shoulder and looking who's going to be using the club of government to batter them, beat them over the head, or economically enslave them. Right. So that, I think, is a big thing. And I'm very grateful for you people for stepping up to this kind of a effort.
So I take notes whenever I have discussions. So right. you had brought up with, like, let's say, someone who's drug addicted.
Mm-hmm.
I have no problem that, like, and this is where the ideas with libertarianism wanes in. Okay, if someone is a junkie, it's unfortunate. I wish that they would have had a better opportunity. Whatever, when they zigged when they zagged, or when they should have zagged. And so I guess if this person, we can all see it. You can see in any major city where there's a lot of drug use, Skid Row, you look at East Hastings in Vancouver, it's famous because it's chaos. It's just, it's destitution. It's sad. And like when I used to drive through these areas, I felt sad, and I wished that, like, hey, if only you got help, like maybe you needed the kick in the ass to become something, that you would actually become something. So, and we actually even had a topic where I'll ask you this directly as someone who's a libertarian.
Okay.
Is it morally reprehensible for someone to make an anatomically correct or anatomically correct doll of a, let's say, your brother's daughter? She's like 12 years old. Is that okay?
Yeah, see, in terms of the ethics and the morality of it, I would say that's vehemently wrong, because this person is obviously they have obviously ill intentions and evil desires, and it's something that I would definitely disagree with. But given the option, this is the thing that a lot of people don't understand about this thing is we have ideals, and I have standards, and I would definitely be vehemently against anything like that. But if your option was to lock this person in a cage, right, which requires, so not only they being punished and penalized, but we're the ones that would have to pony up to pay for all of that, right? So or is this having this thing, this inanimate object that is not a human being, but it is a representation. Now, at the personal level, I still believe in, because especially if you say it was an actual like of another person, I think that should be something that should be dealt with in terms of some kind of legal precedent in terms of using other people's likenesses, because it's different if you're just using some inanimate object, right? And of course, I'm not a legal scholar, so I would definitely think there would have to be some kind of legal precedent, just like right now, if you impersonate another person, right? You're not allowed to impersonate another person. So there would be areas in there, because it could go to, destroying the reputation or the credibility or even the life of this person that you're trying to use as that means.
So how would you enforce that?
Well, see, this is what I mean. Enforcement. So when you get to that point, and I get it, and these are the things that are going to happen, but it's like you're already 5 steps too late. So to me is let's go back a few steps and just try to make it so that we're living in a society where you don't have these kind of things that are taking place. So
Right.
so first of all, this example that you bring up, this just a made up
though it's real.
Okay, a real thing that
it was real.
I would want to know, like, so what happened to who raised this person, right? Like, what happened in the family that this person got to that point? And that's where I think where people get to the point where they see bad things happen and their immediate gut instinct and reaction is to look for something to prevent bad things from happening. Well, I'm here to say as a libertarian, or even just as a human being, that you're never going to get to the point where bad things are not going to happen in society. That things are going to happen, but as long as we protect the individual, that person themselves, and the individual, so not just their person, but their likeness, right? Because even when you're talking about, think about how that if you can just use other person likeness in terms of facial recognition, in terms of impersonate them and using their identity for nefarious purposes. So, like I say, on the legal side of it, I don't know, but I would go back to get to the point where we got to fix our society, and I think that's where Christianity and actual free market. So if you have Christianity and those underlying ethics, and that's why capitalism and Christianity actually work so well together. Capitalism gives you the economics of things, right? The numbers and how you can proceed in those goals and areas in life. And they are important. When people say that money don't mean anything or money is the root of all evil, no, money is merely a representation of our labor and our productivity. So money is actually very important for us in living in a modern world. But in addition to that, I kind of lost my train of thought there because I had two things that I was going. Sorry about that. Yeah, but I know because I kind of get on a bit of a tirade. But basically, like I say, that's what it was. So libertarianism, the NAP. So if you were on an island,
non-aggression principle,
right? Yeah. So so if you were on an island, here's the way I like it to say it. So if you're on an island, libertarian principles, the non-aggression principle, self-ownership, and property rights, that would be the basis right there that you could start, right? Those are your baseline rules of engagement. And that to me is ideal. I don't think there's any other philosophy that has perfected that so well, because it does prevent the use of force and violence. So I think those things alone would be a great basis. But then as you grow that society and you become, intermingled in a society type setting, well, there are going to be situations like you bring up that are going to come about. But rather than always create, and that was the point of the jurisprudence and Magna Carta from 800 years ago till now, is rather use collective statements or collective punishments or collective guilt or anything. Is the whole point of our legal systems in our modern Western worlds is to get down to the case level, right? Because when you bring up a hypothetical or a scenario such as that, there's just so many other variables and informations and facts and things like, let's say this person like did what you said. I think that's not a good thing to do. Obviously, I think that's terrible. But once again, maybe this person has a very aging, and they hide this well or whatever, but this person maybe has an aging or elderly, someone that they're taking care of, and that person relies wholly on this person, right? So what would be the answer? I guess you could lock the person in a cage for doing something that's inappropriate to an inanimate object and feel good about that. But what are the unintended consequences, like the fact that now this person is no longer there for someone who was quite vulnerable and may very well succumb to life themselves because of the loss of that person? So like I say, there's just too many variables to get into these hypotheticals and say that I know the answer. First of all, and I'm humble enough to admit that I'm not the kind of person that has those answers. That's the thing. And it's a difficult thing because everyone likes to know there's got to be some answer to every question, but there isn't. But like I say, if you have the libertarian principles and those Christian ethics, those meta stories that a lot of us, I'm sure you folks might have yourself, that grew up and they resonate with to me to this day. And my relationship with God, I don't go to an organized church, but my relationship with God is quite personal. But I always keep them because I realize that even with just libertarianism, it allows for a lot of hedonism. And I don't personally, I don't want to use violence against people who are hedonistic, but I recognize that that's a terrible slippery slope for society to go down. And we want to do whatever we can and make it conducive so we can minimize that as best we can, at least. And with the knowledge that we're never going to create a perfect society. And even with those Christian ethics, right? If you cancel, this person, to me, it's kind of aligns with, if you went full on harsh on this person, that's kind of like a right-winger cancel culture, right? Because this person, just like with Christianity, this person might be redeemable. I don't know. They might not be either, right? I don't. That's the thing. I can't be.
Yeah, we know the recidivism rates of people who try to, like, eventually people who, the doll only works for so long.
I suppose.
Is it the slippery slope argument? Maybe, maybe not. But when we see the kind of the progression of, okay, well, it's a doll now. Well, then the doll isn't. I more look at it as it's fetishistic. It is. This is hedonism kind of unchecked. That someone's like, oh well, it's just a doll. Well, what if I just go sit next to a little girl and I rub her leg? And then, again, yeah, we can talk about the slippery slope argument. Maybe some people, they just stop at the doll. But, and this is why, like, these trade-offs that we have within society is we need a mechanism of enforcement as much as, the way that I've rationalized it. If we're playing Monopoly and the banker, every round they're yanking $100 bill out of it. Well, do you want to play the game with that person? It's like, well, we agreed on these rules, but now you're writing your own stuff. You're making things up as you go along. So I think in a world where if everyone was libertarian, we all agreed on the ground rules, fine. But we live in a society where some people don't play by those rules. There's literally the hardcore leftists that just say, you know what, I just want to watch the world burn. I don't care about the rules. Look no further than, well, we've expanded gun bans in Canada and we've only seen gun crime go up. So I think we do need an enforcement mechanism. Sorry, what was that, Kim?
Yeah, no, I'll agree with that because like that's a huge thing is a slippery slope. Like I've mentioned quite a few times on our show that I am a huge true crime watcher, listener, everything. And the thing is, how do most serial killers start? Well, they start with animals, right? So they always start at one point and then they make it to where they're actually trying to go. Now you have in this particular situation, well, the mindset is they are attracted to something. And yes, they might start with a doll, but eventually a huge percentage of the time, not every time, it's going to lead to something more sinister. And with that too, like, yeah, you can look at upbringing and stuff like that, but that only goes so far because there are a lot of criminals who've had shitty upbringing. So you can look back on that and be like, well, yeah, that makes sense. They were abused by their parents. They had this, they had that. And you can kind of try to rationalize where that train of thought had even started from. But on the offset, there are people out there who have had great upbringings. They have not been subjected to the things that they're into. And these are the roads that they're choosing to go down. And you have the parents who try everything that are sitting there going, what went wrong? Like, I don't understand. Like, we took all the precautions. And so I don't know. It's a very slippery slope, I feel. And sometimes I'm not really sure what it would take to figure these things out, to be honest. But I think giving somebody an animal to fillet and play with when they have or desires to kill a person would not be ideal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You mentioned what you're into, and I just wanted to confirm, just to make a kind of a light joke of it, but you're not into that murder porn, are you?
No, I didn't even know that existed.
You watch South Park?
It's been a minute. However, isn't it Rule 34 or something like that? If you think about it, there's probably a porn of it.
yeah. But anyways, but no, to get back to more serious, but I did want to mention too, though, is here's the thing. So and I get it, and I know that you folks have nothing but the best of intentions, which is why I love having these conversations. And don't worry about, I will just say this too, don't even worry about whatever you want to bring up if you think it's might going to bother me, because like I say, I've dealt with so much now that I love having good conversations, as long as it's good faith conversations. But here's the thing. I was just writing this down so I would make sure to remember, but think about how many laws we already have on the books, right? I mean, from even just the founding of our country in 1867 till now. I mean, how many hundreds or thousands and thousands and thousands of laws, rules,
It's some
regulations.
ridiculous
Like it's
candy
just
apple pie on Sundays, like just some stupid ones. Yeah.
right. Right. So the experiment that you folks are talking about, like it's already been done, and it's been done not just in our country, but it's been replicated in 200 plus countries around the world. And it doesn't prevent bad people from doing bad things. And you're never, like I say, the road to hell, as they say, is paved with good intentions. And the same with the utopian collectivists, right? And even some of the libertarians in terms of use, like in the state, if you're using force in terms of minarchists, if you're using the state and you're trying to clobber other people over the head to get how your perceived ideal in society, other people might not share that. And now you've become the oppressor. Now you're the tyrant, right? But this is the problem, is we have to get to the situation. And this is the difficult part, is because writing laws, just like with a parent, right? And when I was raising my two sons, and I tell you, they're boys, like they were freedom oriented. They were raised, so there was lots of times, there was lots of contention, lots of heated discussions and stuff. But to me, it wasn't. I watched it, and I kind of chose to go the opposite way because I was raised in a situation, a scenario where everybody, not just your parents and aunts and uncles, but the preacher, the principal, the teacher, everybody beat you. It was just a field day for when I was a kid. It's like, hey, well, of course you beat kids. That's just what you do, right? It was as simple.
Sometimes
right?
you just
gotta.
Right.
But that's the thing. But I tried. So my experiment was I tried the opposite way, and I led by example. I was definitely firm. Like I was never the kind of parent like, oh, just gonna let your kids do whatever the hell you want. But I gave them, just like when I grew up as a latchkey kid, as a Gen Xer, I was like, I want them to experience those kind of actual real world social freedoms, because I think that's where you get the street smarts. That's how you learn a lot of things, is without supervision. Sometimes you need a less structured environment, because that actually teaches people how to problem solve. But sometimes. To me, but like I say, so even if we come up with a scenario now, is what would we do? Come up with like more laws? But once again, these heathenists, whether you're talking about the pedophiles or people that just do all kinds of crazy, but all you end up doing at the end of the day is shove them underground, just like with the drug trade. The more drug laws they come out with, they just shove it more underground, right? Matter of fact, the war on drugs created, if you watch the correlation, the war on drugs made it so there was more drugs than you could ever imagine. Right? As soon as there's a war on drugs.
I know. And that's where, like, for me, I'm still very like liberal in these senses. Like, okay, I have a problem when we institutionalize these types of things.
Right.
I have a problem when, if someone is a junkie, if someone has an addiction, I am now used, in society, you agree to these things. And I used to disagree with this. I know Michael Knowles had brought this up, that like we get the government that we deserve. And our government is a representation of the people. If we the people are okay with corruption, as we've seen time and time again with our own government, and there's no moral outrage, or there's no large voice that's saying this is disgusting, well then me as the individual, or even speaking in terms of a larger group of people that are all sharing that same voice, then it's not illegal. Like the scandals, the corruption isn't illegal, because laws are just morally what we find we have agreed as a society that we found murder as reprehensible. We found doing terrible things to children is reprehensible. So, and that's where I think that there is, the kind of Ron Paul and Rand Paul's kind of philosophies of, like, even in terms of abortion or any of these kind of hot button issues, where I think our culture is a lot more impactful than government. And I'll say that the Liberal Party, or just the left in general, the Democrats, any kind of social leaning kind of party, as Andrew Breitbart had said, that politics is downstream from culture, and our governments, the left-leaning governments, have been very good at ingratiating themselves with the culture. They make themselves part of the culture,
right?
And so it's like this weird perversion, because it was culture dictates laws, dictates policy. And so if our policies are, hey, you know what? Who are you to discriminate on this person based on the color of their skin, while the other side is saying, no, we should discriminate based on the color of someone's skin. And that's okay. And it's this weird bastardization that I think we've seen within society. Like, I would assume if someone came to you and said, you know what, stick this needle in your arm, or we'll shoot you. There's probably a good chance you're gonna like, you know what, I'll take the hot lead. You're not forcing anything on me. But there's also,
you don't know me very well.
I don't know what you're talking about. What's in the needle? What's in the needle?
Before he finished his sentence, I probably would have already had a foot upside. And I'm not even saying that anyone should do what I do, but yeah, I just like in my personal life, I've been racing machines my whole life, and yeah, I just do things that most people would not do. And I'm not saying that I recommend it, but my threshold and tolerance for risk is much, much higher than most people. So yeah, so maybe I'm not the best example, but I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. But that's the thing with all of this, though, is like I say, and what you're saying with Michael Knowles, here's the problem I have with the liberals and conservatives today and this is why I find it so strange, because after the Enlightenment era, and all the figureheads that were the great thinkers of and the idea makers of the Enlightenment era, was, you can imagine this kind of argument happened back then, because there would have been back then, they were calling themselves liberals or progressives or Whigs or Tories, but basically they had two different sides, and a lot of it basically falls and shakes out to being like, now there's obviously overlay, there's exceptions, outliers, but it basically, if you break it down to the simplistic thing, is conservatism seems to be more correlate to like the man kind of a thing, and liberalism seems to be more conducive with a woman's type of thinking. Once again, this is lots of exception outliers, but that's like saying when conservatives are saying things against like the liberals and how that's this, but they use collective terms. So Michael Knowles, you said, is you get the government that you asked for, but that's like, imagine a mother and a father that were raising 3 kids, and one of the kids stole something. Well, you get the kids that you pop out. It's like, but the other 2 kids didn't steal it. This is the problem when you talk in collective terms like that, and that's what socialists or conservatives and liberals do, is they talk to each other in collectivist terms. And the point of the Enlightenment era and getting down to the individual is, let's deal with each other. Like, people don't realize how important, matter of fact, the biggest focus for all of us today, and I know it sounds a little bit boring, is to discern the difference and show people the difference between collectivism and individualism, because individualism is conducive with Christianity and the ethics, whereas, and at least in terms of the New Testament and Jesus Christ and the teaching there. If you go back to the Old Testament, there's all kinds of collective guilt and punishment, and I'm not a fan of that stuff. And that's why the Reformation happened, because if you just follow the edicts of the Old Testament, well, we would all be just killing everybody, right? So, but the big thing is, just like in a household, just like at the macro level in terms of your society and government, is yes, some people deserve the government, but I didn't. As someone that has never voted for any of these fools, I can't say that I necessarily deserve that, having constantly being inundated with these socialist policies and having my paycheck constantly plundered. I've never voted to take anything from anybody. I don't even really do much in terms of voting, because there's another way to look at voting. Well, I'm doing it to defend myself, but then I have to. Sounds good in theory, but the person that I would be voting for isn't doing what I'm asking. They've been appointed, and I have to hope that they agree with me, at least in some capacity. So, like I say, matter of fact, I think the collective thing, the one thing, even at the political level, that would help us to see the difference, and you could see it in real life, is let's just get rid of political parties entirely. That alone, if each individual had to run on their own credibility, their own reputation, their own ideas, right? Because what you see with a party is just a big collective, once again, where everybody got to bow and get in line with whatever the head guy says, right? Or whatever is most popular. So it's always sacrificing the individual for somebody else's concept of the greater good. And the greater good sounds good depending on who it is, right? Mao, right? He was fighting for the greater good. Hitler was fighting for the greater good. Stalin, Lenin, all these people, like even Trudeau himself, right? He was doing it for our own good when he was shutting down our businesses, right? Preventing truckers from crossing the border and keeping their livelihood. I mean, even and all the provincial, they were all doing it for the greater good. Just like parents, I'm doing it for your own good. But really, is it for the good of them, or is it for what you perceive as good? Which is why it's important for us to get back to the individual. What's good for you might be good for you, but let's just and I use this analogy and then I'll let you respond because I know I've kind of been going on here. But analogy I use time and time again is just think about it like this. Just like the island thing, even if you didn't know what a libertarian was, if you were to sit down and play a board game, right? We were all going to create the board game. Well, the first thing you would want to do once you've done it is, okay, what are the rules? And everyone playing that game, there would be no exceptions, right? And government is the exception. But if we, at the individual level, we all know we're not going to play a game if somebody, like, we all have to play by these rules. But this one person over here, no, we can avoid those rules. We can deny them if we deem them not, worthy of our respect, right? This is the problem. The minute you give anybody, and that's what government is, it's basically the get out of morality or ethics free card is what it is. And we're giving people that ability. Whereas at the individual level, and in the absence of this coercive entity that can reinforce that, then we would have to deal with each other. And people think, oh, it would be just like anarchy would be just the worst ever. But have you ever been to a flea market? And I know there's already cops around, but it's not like if you do something wrong in the flea market, the cop's going to be there to prevent you. That might come along later and file a report. But most people, it's not that we don't prevent ourselves to cause harm to another because there's a law, but we do it for rational self-interest because we want to get by life ourselves, right? And if we're constantly using force or imposing our will or stealing from others, yeah, we might benefit ourselves in that short time. But we know that if that's kind of conducive, that's the kind of society we live in, well, it'll be short-lived because somebody else will come along and steal it right back from me. So once again, the biggest thing is get it back to the individual level and let's deal with each other at that level and stop with the collective ideologies, the collective and the group think, because it's too conducive with we still have that amygdala, that monkey part of our brain, and that it resonates with so well. And if we're going to evolve as human beings, we have to tamp down that urge to constantly just want to conform to the collective. It served us well, hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of years ago. It served us very well. But as modern people living in the information age, in the digital age, we've got to move far beyond this kind of thinking. See,
I would disagree in we make generalized statements all the time. Mm-hmm. Like it is yes, you can talk in macro sense and then you can get down to the micro. Mm-hmm. So if you see, if you're walking in a bad neighborhood and you see a person approaching you with their hood up, you're going to make a generalized statement. Well, I'm in this area, maybe they look a little different than I do, or they perceive as a threat. We have to make a decision there. And I actually think government is our morality. Government is the literal interpretation of our morality. Like, okay, here's an example.
Blaine, yeah, thank you.
If someone came up to you and said, I'm going to take your kid from you. They told me that they're trans and I'm going to take them away from you in order to save them. Do you think that the government should be involved and able to stop that person from taking your child?
Nobody should be able to take my kid away from me that has nothing to do with my kid. That's like, I mean, unless I've done something violent towards my own kid, right? That's the only intervention that I think any externality or outside force would have to intervene is if there was actual, that's the thing with libertarians. As long as you're not using violence, then, I might disagree with the way you raise your children. I might disagree with lots of things, but if you're not, imposing violence. And I definitely, I know people myself in my community that this whole trans issue personally affects. And I got to tell you, the parents that are having the worst go of it are the ones that are thinking that they can just somehow, intimidate them, bully them, or use some kind of coercive tactics to prevent it from happening. But all you end up doing at the end of the day, especially if you're talking about people that are even remotely in their teen years or something, is how it works. You're just making them double down on the end or the resentment of you, and they will make even probably worse decisions and mistakes going forward. So you got to be really wise and astute about how you deal with those kind of situations. And like I say, every individual situation is going to be unique based on all of the individual people that are involved.
So would you?
I think. Hold on. with your question there, like, do I think that the government should be able to be involved in stopping somebody from taking my child? My personal answer would be no, because if I give the government that type of control to say that you can stop somebody from taking care or taking away or taking my child away from me, I'm giving you that control essentially over my child. What's to say that the government isn't going to all of a sudden turn around and say, okay, well, we're going to take your kid away from you because we don't think that you're fit?
No, so the question is, if someone comes and says, "I want to take your child," they are trans. We've seen in BC, we've seen these sanctuary states in like California, in Colorado, in New York, where if a child is threatened that they might be straight, the terrible blight of being heterosexual, that this child could go to these places and the government there would protect them. So the question is, if a person says, "I'm here to rescue your child from your heterosexual worldview," should the government be involved to stop that person? That was the question.
I
And now,
know, but I think that that would be giving them too much power to then
so
potentially turn around and take your child away from you
so then
on
the
their
government
terms.
shouldn't be involved. You
I don't
don't
think
want
the
the government to stop that person from taking your child.
I don't know.
I'll answer. I agree with you, actually, Kim. Actually, no, I don't think the government should be involved. But if it was anywhere in, like I say, if it affected me personally or anyone in my community, and I would expect this for most people, is I would take that personal responsibility that, no, you're not taking. And that matter of fact, that parent should have the resolve that, if someone's trying to take your kid away from you because they want to transition them, then no, I would say you as the parent should be the one to be the staunch defender of your child against government or any actor that's coming to do harm. Because if, like I say, to me, it doesn't matter if you're wearing a $5,000 pinstripe suit or you come with some kind of a badge and a gun or whatever. If I recognize that what you're doing is unethical, immoral, or against me and what I want for my children, and once again, as long as I'm not using violence on my kids or lock them down in the basement or something where I'm not actually using force, preemptive force and things against them, then no, you have no say. Even if you disagree with how I want to raise my kid, even if you think they should be transitioned, well, I'm a heterosexual, my wife's a heterosexual, we want to raise our son, and when they're adult, this is the thing, when you become an adult, then that child can make whatever decision if they want to, do whatever the heck they want in terms of how they dress. Because in reality, when you're talking about this stuff, other than at the surgery level, a lot of this I see it as mostly a fad, because not to suggest that these things might not have been around, but I mean, all of this, no matter who you are, where you come at it, you got to see that, it went from a very, very tiny thing to now where it's something that's being socially acceptable. And the way that works is because that's how we can Canadian, or not just Canadians, that's why humans can be conditioned, is if it's horizontally enforced, we will accept the most insane fucking things if it looks like it's popular or that's something where we want to get along. And I think that's a kind of a detriment in society, where I don't want to be just the nice Canadian. Matter of fact, when I see stuff like that taking place, I want to speak out, right? The nice guy. And once again, I'll quote Jordan Peterson once again. Nice guys aren't necessarily the great guys, right? A lot of the times the nice people can actually be quite nasty, right? They're only nice to you as long as you do what they say. So yeah, in that personal situation, I would say don't look for government as the force to defend your children. You should be that bulwark. You should be that number one thing that's going to defend your kid against any external threat or people that are trying to take them away from you.
See, and that's the thing. I used to think that, but I would flip it on the inverse now. If a person came to you and I don't know, like there's like those hardcore Christians that, like, if they bring their kid to a doctor, or like if you bring your kid to a doctor, like they'll just, if God wanted them to live, they should live. And, they had they had the flu. It easily could have been cured. Should we be allowed to intervene with something like that?
See, that's a hard one, because in that situation, not helping could potentially lead to the death of a child. Now, not helping for somebody to, but it's What do you mean? How is it the same? Transitioning a child. Well,
we know statistically transitioning a child is a 42% suicide rate pre-post-op. So once you send them on that train track, it's a coin flip whether you find them dead at home or not. So, and this is where I think our government is our morality. This is where we actually find out as a society. Bennett, like as you said, like if we're agreeing all these rules, that's government. That's literally government.
Nope.
Because you need a way to enforce that. Like if there's the one person that says, no, I'm not doing it. Okay, then what?
But you've obviously, whether you go camping, enter into a sporting event, go hang out in a cottage in the middle of the woods, absent of government, people have to create rules, just like in your family setting. There's no government in my family, but there are rules and how we have to, behave and treat each other. But those rules have to be universally consistent. That's how I raise my kids. And that's how all the people in my immediate family, that's how we treat each other. So there can be no exceptions. So if theft is wrong, then none of us get the ability to steal. And if violence, preemptive violence is wrong, right, then we all have to adhere to those rules. Government is literally the antithesis of morality, because government is, by its very nature, what separates government from all of us is it has the supposed authority to impose its will and to use violence and theft, because that's what taxation is. People like to pretend, oh, you agree with it by living here. No, that's like locking some chick in your basement and saying, I'm not going to rape you, but you can't leave here until you have sex with me. Well, technically, I suppose you could say technically you never raped her, but the fact that you said she can't leave your home until she had sex with you, well, that's a little bit of a legalese that kind of fucking is a pretty piss poor justification, right? So this is the thing. Government can never be a representation of our morality or our ethics, because it is literally the opposite, the antithesis of morality.
See, and I would argue the inverse. That's the thing. Like, once I kind of I rationalize or realize that, because like if we look at old laws on the books, no one's gonna, no officer, you're gonna get laughed out of court if a woman what there's some stupid law like women can't go skydiving on like Wednesdays, or some stupid shit, or they can't wear a dress while whatever it is.
Rude.
No judge is they're gonna look at you and go, what are you talking about? It's like, well, it's on the books. It's on the books. But culturally, we would never enforce that.
No.
But I think actually, like, hard, fast laws is the culmination of argument. And this is where I agree with libertarians. And when we have collective, the collective hive mind or whatever psychosis, during COVID, like we could see these things, that things were done without discussion, without the ability to argue. I think this is a problem. Yes, I would 100% agree that government operating in that fashion as an authoritarian, as an autocrat or a dictator, anything like that, is absolutely is the antithesis of morality. It's their morality, whatever the dictators. Speaking of dictators, we can kind of I'll say this, and then it is a segue. It was a shitty segue because I didn't even finish my point like an idiot. But that's where I think in government functioning properly, that we want, if a child could be saved from a parent that says, well, if God wanted them to live, then God shouldn't have killed them. We would want the police to get involved. We would want an enforcement mechanism, just as with any of, say, your rules at home. Well, if your kid just says, hey, Dad, you know what? Get stuffed. I'm having another Pop-Tart before I go to bed. You're like, no, you're not. It's 12:30 at night. You have to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning for school. We need a mechanism in order to enforce that. And that's just how we live. If everyone agreed, if everyone was the same, everyone had that same mentality that we all respect the rules. Well, what about with the rule breakers? What about the guy who keeps that woman in his basement? What about the person who wants
but once again, keep in mind that we already have a gazillion laws on the book, and things, and our societies have actually degraded. So I get you. And like I say, everyone that comes, and I've had this discussion with not just folks like yourself, but actual libertarians that are minarchists who are very, very well versed in the whole, and they can make the same argument in terms of the night watchman state. But this is the thing that and I don't know, like I say, I'm not saying I've cornered the thing, but what separates us is I just don't hold those ideals because I realize it's not translatable into the real world. I love the idea of the concept of the minarchist state, but the only reason why when the founding fathers, how it remained that way for a small sizable portion of their history was because they were starting a new thing. It takes time, just like if you were to start a business, it takes time to grow things, and that's what has happened. But the United States started out as being the most limited government, basically almost anarchistic in its founding. And they went back and amendment after amendment and made sure to cover all their bases, even to the point of saying, well, matter of fact, we tend to turn tyrannical, just like King George. We get the power, just like Lord Acton said, we're probably going to turn tyrannical too. So you know what? Just to make sure, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot by saying, here, all you guys get to have guns. So in case we get too fucking crazy, get too tyrannical, and that's very disturbing for Canadians to hear, but the whole American experiment, but it's the fact that and like I say, if you read the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers, they argued about this minarchist and anarchistic more mindset. And that's what it came down to. And they did try that experiment. They thought they could constrain it. And they did. I mean, the fact that they made it so they had the 3 different levels of government, it was a republic, so it was easier, and it worked. But once again, all it took was enough time for the sophists, though the people that are very good at manipulating the language, and it didn't take them long. Well, basically a couple hundred years, and now the United States would be considered the most, the largest force on the entire planet. Now, of course, you can use it for good, but it's been used for a lot of bad for decades now. So all of the laws on the book, no matter what we do, and no matter how we construct this ideal government in our mind, at the end of the day, it's just like with the carbon tax reprieve, it's going to be short-lived. I mean, and of course that was only conducive because the citizens that were alive and that were in United States were more conducive to accepting that stuff. But it doesn't take long. And there's so many quotes from so many people in the past, is it only takes a few generations to people realize, oh, I can vote to take away from other people. And then once you start down that road, we'll look where we're at. And then it's just constantly whoever gets the club. So, and that's what it is. The bigger the government, the more power it has, the more laws in the book. Now everybody's like, now we're scared to death of government. At least when the government was small and it can only affect us minimally, people were much more peaceful and willing to cooperate in a multitude of ways, even with people that they might have disagreed with. But now that there's this behemoth state in all of our countries, everyone is scared to death of what they're going to do with it. And if our opponents, that gang or group on the other side, gets a hold of it, so now everyone's scrambling to do it. I'm saying let's get to the point where we're using our words like we are today and not using violence. But we have to accept that violence will exist, which is why we need to be able to defend ourselves. We need to be independent people. We need to, just like every scenario that you come up with. I don't say I need government, but you definitely need people in your community. So if there's some family that's doing these things to their kids and stuff, there should be, I don't know, aunts, uncles, community members. I don't know if it's local preach. There's got to be people that can intervene, but without having to use government. Like I say, the only time that force, and that, like I say, whether you're talking about government or from the individual, is the only time you bring force to the table is if there's actually force being imposed on someone else. And if you do that to defend them, so if a child, like saying with a parent that's massively abusive to their children, or does the sexual abuse thing, or tries to transition them, or whatever they're doing, that's the time to intervene, right? There's lots of things you can disagree with parents and how they raise them, but the minute they're bringing violence, because a child especially is helpless, they're in a helpless environment. When you're a child, it's not like you're an adult and you can just leave that space. You're basically trapped in your parents' household. So if they are using violence, and like I say, not necessarily state, but yeah, you should have, like, I'm an uncle, or I mean, my brother's an uncle, and I'm sure if I was, had been terrible to my kids, he would have intervened. I know that he would have, and so would have other people in my life. They would have, whether it was, physically restraining me, or maybe just pulling me aside and having a big chat, or there'd be all kinds of things that could possibly happen. But that's where we need people to come in and find out ways to help better the situation, because the scenario you're painting might be a temporary reprieve for that moment when that particular thing's happened. But if you change that person, their underlying personality or their intentions to do harm, no, so they'll just wait till the next time, or when there's nobody looking or whatever, and then they'll just seek out to impose their will on someone else once again.
This could be a long discussion.
Oh, it's all good, man. Like I say, and no, but I'm glad actually. I really appreciate you actually bringing all this stuff to the table because it's been a little while since I've actually had to sharpen the old stone because I don't have these guys. But it's really important, and some of the things that you're saying, it's helping me to develop more of my thought processes, and I'm hoping what I'm saying is helping you as well. And that's what it is. At the end of the day, I don't mind disagreeing with you folks because I know at least at the end of the day, we're just all trying to figure this shit out, and that's the thing. We all have to be humble enough to accept that I don't have all the answers. You don't have, and none of us are going to have all the answers. But at the very least, the fact that we're doing what we're doing now is we are leading by example. We're saying, well, at least we're going to talk about it and try and figure this shit out, right?
Yes, I agree with that. I think more people need to be able to have these types of discourses to be able to. You need to have opposing opinions in order to have growth.
Yeah.
Like it is what it is. You can't just surround yourself with puppets who are just going to like, yes, master. Yes, master. I totally agree with you. You're so right.
Speaking of growth, check out this douchebag.
Oh, God.
Hold on. I'll figure it out eventually. There we go. David Eby. Good old David from the wonderful province of British Columbia. Bring cash. Unless you're Chinese, then we love you. So this is from the Western Standard. BC NDP's Bill 7 is an audacious overreach that opens the door to authoritarianism. The David Eby, who once led the BC Civil Liberties Association, would never recognize the current blah, 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 blah. David Eby's government, hold a commanding, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Bill C7 is not about making BC's government work more effectively. It is about getting legal approval to govern with unchecked power. It is an audacious overreach that echoes the most authoritarian legislative maneuvers in Canadian history. Some are even comparing it to the scope of the War Measures Act. So why? British Columbians are struggling under the weight of skyrocketing costs, a housing crisis that remains unsolved, and an NDP budget so bloated with reckless spending that it barely fits inside the legislature. This government has now grown public sector employment by more than 40%, while the private sector remains stalled. Meanwhile, international trade disputes and tariffs are threatening our economy. What does David Eby do? He introduces a bill that consolidates power in his hands, hoping voters will be too tied up in the rest of his mess to notice. This bill, from what I've been able to understand with it, is very much on par with where our government, say during COVID, when there's a crisis, they will use that opportunity to look for more ways in order for them to consolidate power within themselves. Because of course, what's a more effective way than if I have to talk to you, I just need the thing done. Shut up. This is what we're doing. And we see this slow march towards this. And this is where I say, like, we get the government we deserve. If BC wants to do this, well, then people should be up in arms. The constituents should be up in arms. MPs or MLAs, MPPs, whatever they're called in BC. I think they're MPPs, members of provincial parliament, I think. I know some places like they call them MLAs, members of legislative assembly. But so when we see these moves, because we've seen our federal government took the position of, well, we can't have an election, or we're not going to prorogue parliament because the tariffs aren't a threat, but we're also willing to suspend elections because those tariffs are a threat. We're talking out both sides of our mouths, and some people are actually agreeing with both positions. Somehow, the cognitive dissonance runs rampant within our society. When I see government making these moves, I get very concerned. I get concerned because I see, if these are my countrymen or women, shut up, bigots. If these are the people that I am sharing this place that I call home with, I am very much the person I'll just go, you know what? I'm out. Hey, BC, you know what? If this is what you want, clearly this is what you wanted. You voted for this. You accept it. Where are the people calling for EB to be removed? Like, this step is a bridge too far. You've
Mm.
made the fact that you even entertained this and you actually tried to get it pushed through. You are not looking at the best interests of your constituents. This is a dictatorship. This is not a democracy in any way, shape, or form. We got to see democracy, the purest form of democracy during COVID, where the absolute majority oppressed the minority to even the point of you should be removed from civil society because how dare you? The 51% absolutely ruled over the 49 with impunity.
Yeah.
So this is where I go, if my worldview is our government is a representation of our morality, of what we want to see from our government, I want out. I want no part of it. This shit, good for you, BC. I hope you get what you want, because that province, as beautiful as it is a shithole because of the people that reside on it or in it, on the ground in this province.
Well, I mean, some of them for sure, a portion of them, the people that would advocate and support that stuff. But this is the point, and I'll actually bring Trump into this equation. So not just David Eby, but all of the premiers and all the politicians, even at the local level and the federal and the bureaucrats. This is the problem. As much as even myself, I find myself some of the things that Trump's doing through his executive orders, right? Things like Doge. Man, I'm a big fan of Doge. You're cutting spending and waste, and I think that's great. But there's going to be a lot of people, especially those in the public sector, who are going to be out on the unemployment line really quick, and it's going to be detrimental to those people. Now, I think it's a great thing. I personally think it's a good thing, and I'm sure there's lots of Canadians like yourself who agree with me. But the problem is, this is the thing with government, is it's great when it's when the force is being used to impose the things that we want. It's always great, but we always got to keep in mind that this exact same thing happens. So it's like you and I are enjoying the spectacle, and my thoughts on it, and particularly the Democrats and the left these days. And I'd be, like I say, I don't pick no sides. I'd be saying the same thing. It was the conservatives that were running and dominating all of our cultural institutions and society these days. But no, it is the left that's been the one that's been clobbering the most on the head. It was conservatives decades ago, but it's been the left has been basically free reign of terrorizing the fucking people into doing whatever they want. And you know, at this point, as much as I am a libertarian, it's like, listen, you fuckers want to go out and poke bears all the time. I'm not going to stand here, as much as I think it's wrong, like that Trump's going to impose his will on you. I want to be a principled libertarian, but it's like, I watched you idiots poke bears for too long, and I'm sorry, I just don't have it within me to want to stand in defense of you. Maybe this is what it's going to teach you a lesson, is, you know, just like the kid that wants to be the bully and he comes and gets beat up, right? Well, I mean, you know, maybe you shouldn't have been a fucking bully. I'm not saying it was great that the guy beat the shit out of you, but it might teach you a lesson, right? Like I say, I'm not advocating for violence, but this is the thing. And whether you're talking about David Eby or whether Pierre Poilievre or whether it's Mark Carney, all these people are going to use, and the people that support them, the people who vote them, are going to want to use their ideal of government to impose their will on the rest. And we've seen that in the COVID thing. But once again, it's only good for that temporary time where you have your gang in power, and then on the other side of it, well, you better wait for that to turn against you. And Canada, at least the US, like I say, the way they're doing it, there's going to be some checks, although I don't think it's going to be as checked as much now that Trump has stacked the Supreme Court deck. But in Canada, we already have two parts of our constitution, and even at the provincial level, where we don't have any enshrined rights. At least there's some areas where the judges can intervene in the US, and sometimes it'll be good or bad depending on your political positioning. But in Canada, there's not really any checks and balances, because if they claim, right, if they invoke the notwithstanding clause or create an emergency, well, then the laws or the courts can't even really intervene, and they can just keep redoing that every 5 years and can impose their will unfettered. So that's an area where, like I said, we really got to get to the point where whether you're talking about the provincial level or at the federal level, is getting to if we're not going to, you know, adopt anything that's remotely resembling the US in terms of becoming part of their country or their economy and adopting their constitution, well, we should be talking about this kind of stuff. Is let's at least update and modernize our own Constitution and Bill of Rights to at least respect our sovereignty at the individual level and stop and maybe make it more so that each province does have that. Because the one thing about the states, there are 48 different, well, 48 mainland, 2 others. But the one thing about COVID is, at least because of their type of federalized system and being a republic, there was some reprieve. Now, I'm not suggesting we should all have to move. Matter of fact, I want it to be sovereignty all the way down to our local, like each individual household. That's really what it is to be a free human being, is you're sovereign all the way down to the individual level. But at least if you have competing, so the states has 48 mainland states that are competing, and they have different ideas on how to do things, just like with competition in the marketplace. So if you were someone that was completely against lockdowns and all that shit, well, you probably want to hang out in Florida or Texas or North Dakota or some of these other more, or New Hampshire, some of these more free states.
You're not
and the
wrong.
people that want to be want to be locked down forever, you go to New York and California and fill your boots. The only problem with that, of course, is then you're kind of sacrificing the individuals in California and New York who don't necessarily want to be part of it. But at the very least, in their type of system, you don't have to cross a border, right? You don't have to have a passport. They at least have the ability to escape some of the tyranny. Whereas in Canada, no matter where you go, at the provincial or the federal level, we're basically stuck with tyrants, and whatever they do, they can impose their will. And we don't really have much in terms of the legal avenue to even challenge it.
I know.
Well, there was a little while ago that they were talking about when, like, penalizing Canadians if they were deciding to, like, if they had a business or something like that, or even assets, and they wanted to move to the States, that they were gonna seize assets and stuff like that. I was like, are you freaking serious? Like, they're like trying to trap you in there. They're literally making Canadians the girl trapped in the basement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and we're seeing, so I have Rob Shaw. I have him pulled up here. So he says, David Eby's new tariff bill. So Rob Shaw, TV politics for Check News, podcast column. He's with CBC Radio West, All Points West, BC.
Okay.
So he says David Eby's new tariff bills give cabinet vast emergency powers to make new laws on anything that supports BC's economy during the U.S. tariff war. Okay. Without approval of legislature, including retroactive measures with sunset clauses of May 28th, 2027. This is the type of thing where, and this, liberals, and I'll shit on conservatives, because the liberals are very good at, I've caught on whenever there's an issue with the Liberal Party, they always go to their Rolodex of, dangling the keys in front of a conservative is abortion will always be a woman's right. They always go to that. They go to the well for that one very, very often.
And I don't believe that.
We'll always support a woman's right to choose.
What about the men?
Always bring up this. That's a whole discussion for another day. But so this, it's when something's going on. So right now, with everything, everyone's focused on Trump. The whole media is talking about how evil Trump is for these 25% tariffs, but it's actually the conservatives who were the ones that launched the missiles first. It wasn't Trump. So when you kind of, with conservatives and liberals and NDP all on the same side, as Mark Twain said, when I find myself on the side of the majority, I rethink my position. And when all three major parties are all in adherence, that's where I start to go, well, what's really going on?
Yeah.
Was this a power grab? Is David Eby simply saying, hey, you know what? I can operate so much better if I was the sole person in charge. I could save BC from this. And so less, even though I take dinner before you screw me, please. This is why when I say, like, hey, if this is what BC wants, who am I? I'm taking the libertarian perspective. This is the libertarian slant. If this is what you want, I am so happy for what BC has elected. And so this is where, No,
I'm sorry. Like, the thing is, you can say that all you want, but the thing is that there's always going to be people who disagree with it. And I do feel bad for the people who get stuck with the shit end of the government that's controlling either their province or their country. Like, it's not, I don't know. It's not
Well,
everybody.
and we have this weird thing in Canada where, you know, what really started to break my mind from even supporting, you know, I'm a recovering liberal. I became, you know, I'm more looked at just what is the other side of this argument? Really trying to understand what are other people saying about this argument because I only heard it coming from a liberal perspective.
Hmm.
And that one question led me down where I couldn't support the Liberal Party anymore. I looked for the Conservative Party to be a bulwark against the Liberal Party, and it wasn't.
Hmm.
Looked at Aaron O'Toole when he ran. I looked at Andrew Scheer when he ran, and I said they're arguing the same things. They're arguing the liberal part. Like the liberals have no shame, and this is what always pissed me off with Andrew Scheer. And I get pissed off with every conservative, everyone who always says like, you know, Justin Trudeau, who wore blackface more times than he can remember. The average person looks at that.
Hmm.
The average person looks at that and they're going, he's wearing a costume. Why is that wrong?
Yeah.
And that's what really bothers me. It's you're using the liberals pulled you down into their arena and they're not ashamed of it.
Yeah.
He's not ashamed that he and this is where I go. He was dressed up as an Arabian Night. It was a play. So are we now taking the same position, the same cancel culture that the left or the liberals have taken, where you know there was a school in Alberta where a teacher was fired because they did a So You Got
Pocahontas.
Talent or whatever the
Oh,
talent
she was
show.
scary Spice or some shit,
Yeah,
right?
she was. Yeah, she dressed up as whatever her name is.
Mel B.
Yeah, she dressed up as Mel B, and they said, "How dare you wear blackface? You're fired."
Like, I'm not wearing blackface. I'm wearing black body. Have you seen my tuchus? I mean,
like, and so when you see these types of things going on, where's the push from the other side? I didn't see it from the conservatives. I didn't see it from anyone really.
Yeah, well, that's the thing when you talk about the side thing. Here's to me that this is the part that we've been missing, and it's unfortunate that Hollywood has been MIA now for, oh geez, I don't even know when the transition started or when it actually happened. But as a Gen Xer growing up, I think what kept our country, because I was even talking with Nico the other day, and when we grew up, we wouldn't have, I think, based on most of our personal circumstances, we wouldn't even realize that this country was very much leaning towards socialism, and even its foundings had a lot of that. And I think the reason why that is, and I'll just speak for myself, and maybe you folks can confirm in any way, Nico kind of helped confirm from him, and I've heard other people mention too, is most of us, we consume a massive amount of American culture through the movies, the music, the television, all the TV shows, the sitcoms. And the one beautiful thing about Hollywood, before it got so fucking crazy, like political in nature, Hollywood typically was about American exceptionalism and making that the emphasis of all their stories and all the plots. It always had that individual at the core, right? And Braveheart is probably one of the best examples of it. Brought everything into the whole thing, right? There's the love story. There's the guy that's just an average dude. He's not, but he turns out to be an exceptional individual. But he's fighting against Longshanks. But here's the thing. We, because of our Christian ethics, and that's one thing about Canada, the US, the UK, most of the Commonwealth, we all have that Christian. So we all, a lot of us were raised either us directly or our parents or our grandparents. So there was a trickle down effect of that Christianity culture. And that, like I say, was very, very much part of Hollywood and how they presented all of their stories and their narratives through their arts and culture. But now what we've seen a massive shift in a pivot. And because Canada is very, very lacking in that, and which is why mostly, if not all of our Canadian talent ends up having to travel to the US, they could be very, like I was mentioning, your son, just like with my son, very talented. But unfortunately in Canada, you're probably not going to see much result of all that talent because of our particular kind of culture with that tall poppy syndrome. I think that is that socialism, that collectivism that does creep into the psyche from time to time. But we've had that American pull on us to kind of lead us more to that individualist and exceptionalistic and all that kind of mentality. But I think now that Hollywood is no longer that staple or that beacon of promoting liberty that we Canadians consume. And now with China being more of a dominating force, and now we're trying to grow in our trade with them, we're pivoting away from those important stories. Now, these conversations are great, and I'm very appreciative once again to have them, but these are only going to resonate with a small percentage of our population.
Mm-hmm.
How most of us got our, if your parents lacked in teaching you these good, upstanding ethics or ideals, that was the beauty of of that kind of culture in terms of arts and entertainment. That's where we're lacking, but we have to find some way. I don't know how to do it. Well, we're doing some ventures. You guys know, because you're part of it, is if we can bring a lot of talent together, and not just people that are good at talking behind a microphone, but people who are good at that, like music, like your son, right? making music. Even my son, he's made some great music that's like even ones for people like that have suicidal tendencies or talking about really important things. And you bring that, because people think about it. Some people just don't want us to be sitting and preach to. They just want to sit and get that kind of information, but you're getting them in a way where they're feeling like they're being entertained instead of being lectured to. To me, that's very conducive with no matter what culture you're talking about, is to bring some of that stuff to the forefront. And that's why I think all of us should look to people, maybe people in your personal life or others that are talented in some way. Because I think that's that gap, that void that we got to start filling, is not always relying on this. Is the thing I'll tell for my lefties. Yeah, sure, I'm all good. For a matter of fact, I'd love for Canada to be not be part of the 51st state, but I'd like us to be even more exceptional than the U.S. in terms of respecting individual sovereignty and liberty and upholding capitalist ideals. But we're not going to do that unless we start leading by example ourselves and giving each other the opportunities. And that's where we got to get away, where some of the Canadians have that, like say, that tall poppy syndrome, and start getting to the point where we actually want to respect and promote each other. And that's, I think, what we are doing today and leading that. And like I say, who knows? We're living in the here and now, so we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what's going to end up as a result of all the fruits of our labor and our endeavors. But there'll be someone in the future that will talk about the things, maybe not us at the individual level, but the things that we did to push back against this. And I'm a firm believer, because if you think of all of human history, we definitely take a couple steps forward, but we definitely take that one big step back. But I think we've always at least adapted and evolved in some way, and not because of benevolence. That's the other thing that I learned actually by listening to and reading a lot of Ayn Rand. It's not even, you don't even have to rely on people being benevolent by nature. Actually, a lot of times people will do the right thing just out of rational self-interest. So I think like I say, I think we can do that. And if we can bring these kind of a cultural aspects into our country, then we can do what we're continuing to do. But then we have other people that are bringing this stuff to the forefront. And this is another area, but churches are another perfect example for the people that go to church. Let's get some of these, these preachers that are being more collectivist in their teaching. Like, if you're a member of their clergy, or talk to them and explain to them the importance of the teachings of Jesus and Christ. So they're actually giving their flock or their members the proper messaging, because messaging matters, just like in your story. These meta narratives, that's the beautiful thing of the Bible that I didn't understand until I listened to a whole lot of people, including like psychologists even, right? But the point of the stories is not for you to believe them wholeheartedly that everything was 100% happened exactly how it said, but the story is to tell you what's a good example for and how you would live and what would be most conducive to having the most peaceful, prosperous society. Nothing's ever going to be perfected, but that seems to be the formula that has worked best for humanity. And let's take that and build upon it. And let's do Canada. Let's do it Canada. Like, I'm tired of the Great White North always having to replicate and look up to the Americans. They've been great for a long time. I really appreciate them, and I got a lot of good American friends. But God damn it, we're basically almost like them. But we've had to live in the Great White North, for fuck's sakes, a lot more harsher conditions. So we should actually be more emboldened to do the kind of things, and even more to step outside the bounds. Because that's another thing I used to brag about too, is actually, Canadian or Americans, 10 times the population and a lot of talented, but at the individual level, think of how many of the greatest comedians. I remember for a while, you couldn't go to a movie, I think it was in the 90s, where it wasn't some Canadian, Mike Myers, Jim Carrey, it was just nonstop Canadians dominating. And that what it is we got Ryan Reynolds. We have a lot to offer, but it's, once again, I think we just got to get out of the meekness that's kind of been imposed on us, and be a little bit more brash like our Americans. And even just like the hockey game, not just go at them toe to toe, but beat them at their own game. That would be just fucking amazing, right? That would be amazing to have, someone that's not just Trump, but bombastic and shit, but Trump like figure that's at least unapologetic in their stance, but much more articulate, much more understanding of liberty, much more well-versed in philosophy and the principles. I would like to see that in spades, because I think that would actually show America how it's done. I would love to see that in our own country.
I think a lot of people resonate with JD Vance.
Yeah.
You know, like they look at like, this is a guy rags to riches story. Like who I always love those stories. Who, you know, the stories of Rocky, you know, the story of Terminator, or the stories of like Alien, like Ripley and Alien. It was the underdog beating the big dog.
Yeah.
And we always love that stuff. So, you know, when we see these politicians kind of in this sphere, I guess, where it's, well, what did you have to overcome? And you know, and I kind of felt for Pierre when he's like, you know, I was basically orphaned by my family. I was adopted. And look at where I went. I'm like, you know, I would be leaning on that shit. Like I was actually outcast from my family. Well, I shouldn't say outcast, but you know, he said like my mother, she had me when she was very young, and she felt that I would have a better life somewhere else. Now look at me. Like I would be leaning on that so much. Like, hey, if I can do this, anyone can. But we got to wrap it up there. This was an hour and a half. It felt like it was like 15 minutes.
Right.
God damn it.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I'm always like, especially now until I work in construction. So at this particular time, I'm laid off. So I have lots of disposable time on my hand, although I still have plenty enough around to do. But if you guys, like I say, I'm for the next couple months at least, I'm looking to do as much as I can to collaborate with as many people. And if you guys want to do this again at another time in the future, I'd be more than happy to do so.
That'd be great.
Well, we'll stick around. We'll say our formal goodbyes. So Bennett, where can everyone find you?
Well, basically, it's if you go on to any of the social media pages, the big ones like the Facebooks and the X and stuff like that. And then I have on Minds, Gab, I have the Rumble, the YouTube, I have all that. It's basically everything is Canadian Libertarian except X. Curse whoever you are that took my username on X. So mine is CAN_Libertarian. Bennett Hunter is my name. And then, like I say, on all the other platforms, if you just type Canadian Libertarian, I've been around so much and produced so much content, I'll probably be the first thing you'll see. But yeah, and like I say, I really appreciate you folks for bringing me on. This has been a great chat. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it was fantastic. All right, so stick around. We'll say our goodbyes. Kim, make like a banana and head out. Leave.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time out of your day to come sit with us and listen to the craziness going on in the world this week. You can catch us in all the places listed in the description box below. You can also see our guest info in the description box below as well, and everything we talked about. Otherwise, we are live on Rumble every Saturday at 1 p.m. Central Time. So hope to see you again there. Otherwise, have a fantastic week. Be kind to one another. We out.